Here is a thought experiment that I want to try with all of you right now. Wherever you're joining us from, think of someone you deeply admire, a mentor, a parent, a quiet hero in your community, someone whose life or ideas have shaped yours. Now tell me, what did they score on their class 10 exams? Or their A levels? Or their SETs? You probably don't know. And more importantly, you probably don't care. That gap between our assessment systems, measure, and what actually makes a human being worth admiring is exactly what we're going to talk today. In the next 60 odd minutes, we're going to turn this entire idea of assessments inside out. And I could not be more pleased to do that with three people whose work lives inside that question every single day. Our first voice comes from India, and she's someone who spent her career asking a deceptively hard question. What does it actually mean to measure learning? Aanchal Chomal leads the assessment team at Azim Premji University and heads field research at Azim Premji Foundation. Apart from involvement in curriculum writing, capacity building workshop across many levels, she sat with government school teachers in classrooms across this country, from Karnataka to Delhi and beyond, and worked with CBSE, NCERT, UNESCO, and the Ministry of Education on questions like how we assess, what we assess, and what we are quietly leaving out. What I find compelling about Aanchal is that her work holds two things at once: rigorous thinking about measurement and a deep skepticism about whether measurement alone is enough. Welcome, Aanchal ma'am. We look forward to hearing your insights today. Our second panelist has done something unusual. She stood on both sides of AI in education debate as a secondary science teacher in UK, and now as a PhD researcher at Northumbria University, studying how teachers decide whether, when, and how to use AI in their classrooms. Joella Lynch, her research sits at the intersection of teacher judgment, educational purpose, and the question of what learning is even for. In an age when machines can pass exams, she's worked internationally, including teaching at the Druk Gyalpo's Institute in Bhutan, where she developed a strong interest in education systems that prioritize holistic development and human potential. Welcome, Joella. And our third voice comes from Bhutan, a country that has perhaps more explicitly than any other asked the question, what is a good life? And what should an education system actually produce? Shring Nidup. Shring Nidup is a researcher at the Druk Gyalpo's Institute and a life science teacher at the Royal Academy. He has led teacher professional development on the Bhutan Baccalaureate, and his core research interest is something I want all of us to sit with for the whole of this hour. How do we widen the lens of assessment so that holistic growth, not just academic performance, actually gets seen? Welcome, Shring. To everyone present here, I would like to clarify that today's discussion is not an attack on exams. Exams do have a place. What we are questioning is whether the systems we built around them have started to eclipse what education is actually for. And before I invite the panelists to share their thoughts, I'd like to tell the audience that this is an interactive discussion. So please feel free to add your thoughts to the chat. And we have some very interesting surprise gifts for the chats too. So getting back, Assessment at its best has been described as a mirror, something that helps a learner see where they are, where they want to go, and what they are genuinely capable of. It is the engine that drives the learning forward. When did we turn that mirror into a ranking machine? Now, a single exam can determine a life's trajectory. So, what human cost goes unmeasured? And for me, the loss is clear: courage, empathy, integrity, curiosity, resilience. These are the qualities that we see in a good contributing citizen of the world. None of them can actually be bubbled on a sheet. So, what's happening to them in a system that only counts what can be counted? Achal, ma'am, can you give us one concrete example from your own context of a learner who the system got completely wrong? And how can educators recognize and nurture these skills and such individuals? Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Archana, for that beautiful opening and a very warm welcome to all those hearing us, and a very warm welcome to all my panelists. You asked me one, I can give you so many. Let me start by giving you this one example of a boy. And I've given this example many times because it's so freshly etched in my memory, though I'm talking about something which happened 20 years ago. So I started my career as a young postgraduate who wanted to change the world, and I wanted to work in the field. I wanted to understand education. So I was traveling to Uttarakhand. It's a hilly state in India, and I was in a district called Udham Singh Nagar. And out there, I was doing a survey with children. So this was environmental sciences as a subject, and we all knew that environmental science is knowing about your environment, knowing about yourself. And there was a question in the questionnaire which asked the student that what do you use your various sense organs for? Because this was an environmental science paper, it had some bits of science and some bits of social science. So I asked this child in Hindi because the test was being administered in a vernacular language, and I asked कि बेटा आंखें किस काम आती है? And you can all take a guess. The child, I had an answer key with me, so it said the eyes are used to see, to read, all kinds of things. And this little child tells me कि दीदी आंखें रोने के काम आती है. I
Ah,
use my eyes to cry. Okay. And I was all but 22 years old then, and just into the field with a lot of josh, wanting to change the world. And this child gives me this response. And I go walk up to my senior and I tell him that, this child has given me this response. I think I need to sit and not administer the assessment tool any further. I need to talk to this child. I need to understand this child. I need to figure out what's going on in his life. I need to know who his parents are, what kind of family does he come from. I need to know whether his teachers are taking care of him. And there's so many. It was a train of thoughts going through my mind. And then I remember I pushed the assessment tool aside and I spoke to this child at length. And he was one of the most curious, most observant, like any other child of 6, 7 years. He had such a lot of curiosity about the environment and he told me so many things about himself. And back then, that evening when I came back, I was happy that I asked that question and it gave me such a plethora of information, knowledge about how a 6 year old thinks. So, you know, I, I was very lucky that very early in my career,
okay.
I realized that assessment is the only tool that gives you a peek into the child's thinking and into
Correct.
the child's life and into the child's soul. There is nothing other than assessment. How we use it is up to us, is up to our understanding, is up to our capability. But assessment is the only and only tool available in education which can help you figure out what's going on in that child's mind. And the power and beauty of a good question and the power and beauty of a good dialogue or a conversation after a question, I think is totally unmatched.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Anshul ma'am. This actually is a very good opening for this fruitful discussion that we're looking at, and such an insight into what an answer can be, which you've not even thought about as a response to a question. Thank you so much for sharing that. So, we've all heard about AI taking over jobs, education world with storm. So the question that I'm asking is, if an AI can score perfectly on a standardized test, as a forward to what Anchal ma'am said, what are we actually certifying when we issue a certificate for the same performance? We may be inadvertently actually optimizing for exactly the skills that the machine can replicate. So, are we killing curiosity, creativity, critical thinking, rather than inculcating these skills? So, Joella, since you're working on this, we would like your views on this.
Thank you, Archana. And yeah, that was a really lovely introduction. I know we've only got an hour. I think I said when we were talking about this, we could talk for days and days about the use of AI in education. There's just so many really important conversations that need to be had. I think from my perspective, and as was mentioned, I'm looking quite a lot at how teachers might be using AI as part of their practice. But I think what a lot of these conversations come down to is that question of what is the purpose of education? Is it to acquire knowledge? And is that what we want to assess for? Um, but I think what we're finding with these the rapid development of different technologies is that actually knowledge doesn't hold the same, I guess, almost like value maybe in the way that it did in the past. It's at people's fingertips. You don't necessarily have to know things to be able to use that knowledge to do something anymore, because that knowledge is quite readily available through the different technologies that we have. And so then that gets me to sort of ask those questions of, well, shouldn't it be more about what we're doing with the knowledge, or our ability to actually learn different knowledges and different new skills and new knowledge? And it brings back to that point you made at the beginning, that I think by getting 100%, 90% on an assessment, sometimes misses it completely misses the journey that you've been on to get to that point. And I think if we've taken this view that assessment is the end point, um, as opposed to assessment actually just being, as was mentioned, part of that journey that allows us to reflect on the skills that we've gained and the experiences that we had. So things like, the resilience, creativity. If you think about any new skill or any new knowledge that you're learning, you don't get it right the first time, or most people don't. We need to be able to feel confident to fail and to get things wrong. And what I guess what I worry about with AI coming into the education sector is that there's a huge focus on mastery learning. There's a plethora of platforms that are all focused on helping students achieve 100%, mastering a particular topic. And I know there's a lot of discussion around that. There is an importance around developing skills and having that kind of logical sequence in certain subjects. But it's like you mentioned, that shouldn't be the end point. It shouldn't just be that we've mastered something. And I think that's what my kind of worry is with AI, is that we're going to put too much focus on just being able to have to master a subject. And I think, like you've mentioned, learning is not a linear process. So trying to test everybody with the same milestones also, we know, isn't an effective way of doing that, because different people learn at different rates, and that there's also just different challenges that will come up at different points for different people. And again, I worry that the use of sort of AI in this kind of mastery learning way might actually just continue to kind of try and keep people on that sort of that same path. But I do also think there's opportunities there as well. And I think like when any new technology comes along, it's really thinking about how can we use this technology in a way that's going to enhance what we want to happen in this area. So again, that's where I think it really becomes important to actually ask, what is education for? What are we doing with young people, with ourselves? And is there a way we can use this technology in a way that helps us work towards those goals, rather than necessarily trying to work within the system that's already there, and that actually might then just continue to exacerbate some of the current problems in that system. Actually use it as an opportunity to say, can we do something completely different? Is there a way we can use this to think about the way we do education differently? So that's where
Absolutely.
I am with, sorry, thinking about this. And I think I don't think anyone has the answer for this at this point. I think we're just at the beginning of these conversations, and they're incredibly important to have.
Actually, thank you so much, Joella, for pointing out. What is very important to remember is that the purpose of education. What is the purpose of education? And two things that also intrigued me and caught my attention were confident to fail, as you said, and also that it is an opportunity to look at what is the purpose of education and how we are facilitating the young minds to go forward through the system of assessments. I'll come back to purpose of education for Achal ma'am after some time. But right now, I have a question for Shring, because it also brought me to the fact that was mastering 100% marks enough for that, or is lifelong learning is what we are looking at? So to carry forward a question for Shring, I have been to Bhutan, and I feel that you people, or Bhutan baccalaureate particularly, in their assessments, look at empowering the learners, becoming self-reliant and self-assess their learning. So I was wondering, the most powerful learners are those we know who accurately evaluate their own progress, identify gaps, and adjust. And this is a metacognitive skill. But are we really teaching this explicitly? And more importantly, are we assessing this? And this is where I feel we can differentiate between lifelong learners and test takers. So, Shring, I would like to ask you to talk about how assessment in Bhutan Baccalaureate talks about this lifelong learning and learner taking charge of their own learning. Over to you.
Thank you. And I think what I really kind of resonated with when Nachal was talking about the story with the young boy and what we possibly can do with assessments, particularly, is a peek into the mind. And that phrase for me is very powerful because all we can do looking from outside is to get a peek into what a student or a teacher, a learner in this case, is thinking inside. A lot of it has to come from within the person. And that I think is where my own understanding of various assessment systems is we are too kind of focused on what are observable behaviors or demonstrations of what is going on inside, in that sense that our assessment systems, but particularly those go across various systems and all of these, that you're too focused on building systems where you're relying a lot on external observers looking at and figuring out whether a child has understood something or is demonstrating something. There is very little space in that for the person to come in and say, hey, I have understood this, or I didn't understand this. Here is my evidence of growth. This is why I think I have understood certain things. What you were calling off as metacognitive, but also I think for me, a lot of reflective practices in that sense. But I think the individual is important, and generally into that, our systems function. The way I look at it, which is our systems have a lot of lack of trust between various levels of the system. There's a general lack of trust on the fact that we could rely on an individual to be able to tell us that they are growing or they are developing. And likewise, there's a lack of trust on the teachers, saying the teachers would be able to determine what would be the best way of figuring out what the students are doing. Hence, we go down a lot more of the standardized path. And that's what we are trying to kind of balance out with bringing the role of an individual. But I think what is more important also is the individual doesn't function on their own, and giving that space for the individual as many external sources to come together. And that's what we're trying to do with the Bhutan Baccalaureate assessment system, is place the individual who's being assessed in the middle, but around that, you create as many opportunities and lenses for observing what the individual is demonstrating in many different situations. The best we can do with our assessments is that we can capture various patterns that are emerging and use these patterns to then tell the individual, hey, these are some of the areas that we think you're growing in, and these are some of the areas that we think you need more support in. What do you think as an individual? Do you agree with it? And bringing these two together, I think, is where a lot of our effort is going towards.
Thank you, Shring, for that. So, absolutely correct that you are giving the individual that choice to align with what they have assessed and what you have assessed. So this is a question before I go back to the panelists for the audience. What happens when a learner's self-assessment and their teacher's assessment conflict? Please type in your answers in the chat. And as mentioned earlier, we have a few surprise prizes for the audience as well. So waiting for people to put their answers in the chat. So I go back to Achal ma'am, and taking cue from Shring's answer, there are two things. Of course, I want you to also talk a little about the purpose of assessment, which also comes in mind. And also, please share your views on how do we build self-assessment in a system that is actually, like Shring said, is based on external judgment and a little mistrust.
Yeah, it's rather unfortunate that education, which is supposed to be one of the most intimate process, I would say, and relationship between the educator and the one who's being educated, is often engulfed with the negativity of mistrust and hierarchy, lack of autonomy, lack of agency. So it's rather unfortunate. And therefore, everything boils down to the culture and the school processes. Because good assessments thrive where the school culture, where school systems are conducive to learning. There is no other way. So if we look at broadly what assessments can do, they can essentially do four things. One, they can help you measure the extent of learning, which can help you take a decision, which is usually what, say, a board examination does or an end year final exam does. That you've taught for an entire year, let's figure out the extent of the learning. There are creative ways of measuring these kind of year-long learning, but sometimes the easy and the most convenient way out is to do a summative assessment and perhaps have some internal assessment component like a project. So one big purpose of assessment is administrative, which is to promote, to certify, and to understand how much of learning has happened. The other big purpose of assessment is when we try to measure how are we doing as a system, how are we doing as countries entrusted with educating our children, how are we doing as school systems. So for instance, in India with the central board, we have an assessment called SAFAR. At the national level, we have Parak as an agency which does the Rashtriya Sarvekshan, which was earlier done by NCRD, and it was called the National Achievement Survey. Internationally, we have heard of the PISA assessments. So these assessments broadly help you figure out the health of the ecosystem. What is troubling is that in many school systems, these large scale assessments, as we colloquially call them, have begun to also dominate classroom assessments. Classroom is not a place to help children ace multiple choice questions. Classroom is a space to enable learning, and learning is not cannot be measured by just giving four answers and out of which one answer has to be correct, right? So therefore, the third and most important purpose of assessment is that which enables learning. Enabling learning is very important. We are not any process of assessment that is disabling learning, which is creating a straight-jacketed approach to learning, which is sort of celebrating uniformity, standardization, are not assessments that enable learning. So one essay in a class of 50, every child should write a different answer. Even if two children are giving you the same answer for an essay, there is some problem in your language teaching, right? Science experiment, at least five different experiments. If all children are only picking up one and two, it means that something has not gone correctly in your science class. There are so many such examples. Okay. So the third and the most important purpose of assessment is what we also call as formative assessments. And that is the business of schools, that is the business of classrooms, that's the business of teachers. And that is the assessment that will truly help us realize human potential. You know, the kind of dispositions that Joella was talking about, empathy, critical thinking, resilience, the kind of things Sharing was talking about, these kind of things, like I was stating earlier, can only thrive in a school system where the culture is conducive to learning and where teachers use assessments of children to not just understand the child better, but also understand themselves as educators better. So that is the third and the most important purpose of assessment. The fourth purpose, and that purpose I think is especially applicable for countries like India, where you have too many people applying but too little seats. If you look at any of the higher education, the situation, whether you want to enter into a a top notch college in Delhi University, or you want to enter a top notch medical college or a top notch engineering college, you need to write these draconian exams, what we call as selection tests, right? Whether it's the IIT, whether it is
Yeah,
the NEET, the CUET. So those are again examinations for selection. Now we have to segregate these four purposes of assessments. Assessments which measure or certify learning, assessments which help us select students, assessments will help us measure systemic health. They have to be of a certain kind, but assessments that happen in the classrooms have to be fundamentally different. We need a total transformation in the way we look at classroom based assessments. And we can only do that if we have clarity that these four purposes are different, and therefore the designing process of these four assessments and how you use the results of these four assessments have to be different.
absolutely. Classroom assessments have to be the ones that drive learning forward. And we can see that there has been a lot of breakthrough in this mindset where this assessment literacy is coming through in many parts of school system now. But what about it percolating down to all stakeholders? Schools have moved towards richer assessment models like using portfolios, using projects, but has it percolated down to everyone? When I see in my own experience, if I talk about parents, parents are often very anxious. They worried. Some schools have brought in the policy of no grades, no formal assessments till grade 6. But there are parents you find are very anxious about grades and ranks. So, how do we bring parents into this conversation? What do they actually want for their children besides the demand for scores? Joella, would you like to share what these changes you're seeing in your own scenario? And also tell us a moment when you saw a student's self-image change because of the different kind of assessment that was administered. What happened, Joella?
Yeah, thank you. That's a really interesting question, I guess, that how do we get parents involved? And I think just building on what Anshul has just talked about there, I think especially in the UK, there's a culture for students' test results to be proof that a teacher is good. And I think that's a really interesting kind of conversation or thought process to have, is that actually your validation as a teacher is how well your students perform on a test, and then kind of an end of year test as well. And I think that puts a lot of pressure on teachers to prepare students to do well in that test. And then unfortunately, it kind of we lose that opportunity for the type of assessment that we've been talking about, that kind of classroom assessment that actually helps engage and deepen learning. Instead, teachers are often kind of having to focus on that performance kind of type of assessment. So I think that's also a real, and that's why that school culture comes in. But I also think that's where parents come in as well, because ultimately a lot of the time parents only can understand how well their child is doing in relation to other children sometimes, or where they are, or where they ranked, or how they did in a test compared to other students, or things like that. And I think particularly in the UK, what's quite interesting is, and again, bringing in the idea of sort of technology, there's a lot more kind of online platforms that are allowing parents, teachers, and students to engage with one another. That certainly when I was teaching, it wasn't there to that extent. When I was a student, it definitely wasn't there. And so I think technology is a really, again, a great opportunity for us to bring parents kind of into that fold of maybe actually understanding a little bit more about what is your student learning in the classroom, what's the kind of the purpose behind different assessments. But I think you're right. I think a lot of parents, it is just that very much, I want my child to do as well on the score on the test as possible, and that's why they're going to school to some extent. And I think potentially parents of different generations as well have gone through education systems themselves, and they remember what their education was like and how important it was for them to do well on the test and things. And so I think as well, it's engaging parents in that dialogue around what are the important skills that are relevant for their children or their young people now. And some parents, depending on their jobs, they might kind of be more open to understanding that and to discussing that a little bit more. But I think, yeah, schools, for a long time, I feel like schools were quite isolated, especially in the UK, from parents. And I have seen, particularly around AI, actually, that students using AI has opened up conversations between schools and parents around what we are expecting students to do or to not do, how you can support students with online safety and things like that. So I think taking those opportunities to get parents to come into school and actually understand what's happening is really important. But again, it's not an easy task with any of these things, any of these kind of really important things. It's not easy. Otherwise, we'd be doing it and we wouldn't be having these conversations about it as much. I think just coming back to your question about an example with a student, it's a difficult, well, it's not a difficult one. There's so much kind of rich reflection around that, and I think sometimes it's that penny drop moment, which I know as anyone who teaches always kind of refers to that kind of bit where you can kind of you see a student realize that they've understood something, or that actually they've achieved something before they hadn't actually set out to achieve. And I think what that always brings back for me actually is having students or learners understanding what their learning goals are, I think can be really important. And it doesn't always have to be 90% on a test. Being able to say the periodic table, memorize, being able to do this type of multiplication. It can also be through that process of learning. And I remember having a student who just really struggled to complete their homework. It was just one of those things. It was a school in the UK and they just never managed to get homework in on time. And it was just one of those things as a teacher, we set homework, we wanted it back. And sitting down with that student and having a discussion of, where's the barrier? What's the thing that's holding you back from being able to do that? Working through that and then actually realize that it was just that they didn't have time or a quiet place at home. So then there was that thing of, well, actually, you know what? You could just come into the classroom at lunchtime and you could do your homework then. And seeing the student kind of think about how they could achieve, like the different way that they could actually achieve a goal, and then actually sticking to that made the way that the students saw themselves, that actually I can do these things. It's not that I can't do it, but maybe if I just think about it differently, then I can kind of achieve a goal somehow.
Yeah.
So I think yeah, just that opportunity to kind of let students recognize what is it that they want to take away from that particular piece of learning, as well as sort of Saring's mentioned as well, that kind of that individual goals and that reflective process really
Yeah.
does help students recognize that even if they didn't pass the test or get the highest score, they've still really achieved quite a lot. And that sometimes that moment to reflect on those things that they've achieved is more important than the result.
Absolutely, I agree with you. And it takes me back to the first example given by Anchal ma'am, where she said she put aside the assessment tool and started talking to the student. So it's the reflective process, not only of the student, but also of the teacher on how to help the student actualize their potential and look at what they can do in the little time that we have with all of them. We have to achieve this as well. So thank you so much. And I have got some lovely responses from on the chat also. People have talked about rubrics. Education should provoke exploration in not threatening environment. And difference in assessment will lead to a fruitful discussion between the teacher and the students. And it is essential for students to understand the true purpose of education. At present, most students are primarily focused on just passing their grades. And this is the crux of the situation. This is the debate that we're having. Is the grade important or is the overall learning important? So, and there is more. I'll keep coming back to the chat. So I'll move forward with the question for Shring. We have seen that most universities, progressive schools have tried to break this uh, problem of this focus on grades by looking at portfolios, learning journals, and narrative evaluations as primary evidence of growth. But what do the students say about this? Do they feel more seen, or they just look at it a different type of assessment? Shring, I would like you to say something about this.
Yeah. So I think a, a lot of what Anchal said and what Joella said kind of is the reality of various education systems right now. And there are very interesting positive developments at various levels of the system, which is something that gives us a lot of confidence in the ways in which we see education and its role and the purpose of assessment. But I think at the systemic level, what Joella is saying about the system in UK and what Anshul is saying about the system in India and what I see as the system in Bhutan and in various other places is still the same. What gets valued? And it comes down to not so much on the purpose, but I think coming out of the purpose, what is considered important? And what is quite interesting here is I think I've been having over the last 2 months a series of conversations with mostly senior students, grades 11 and 12 students across various Bhutan baccalaureate schools, basically just wanting to get their perspectives on this whole thing about roadmaps and giving them the strengths of planning. And a lot of the anecdotes that the kids share are very interesting and promising. As in, they talk to me about their experiences, what when they put something down as their goal, they then commit to something. So they see this as a commitment to themselves, but also to their mentors or their parents, and then they work towards it. But after a while, they start thinking about, is this even valuable? Because all that my teachers talk about and all that my parents talk about is to do well in an examination. And here I think you're not trying to blame the teachers or the parents. I think it's the system that kind of puts all these layers of filters. Something that kind of intrigues me in both positive and negative ways is what I'm starting to see with the changes that universities and higher education institutions are driving, which is, they're now starting to realize that your grade 12 or the high school examination, which is a standardized examination, is not a great indicator of seeing whether a student would be able to do well in my university or in my place of work. So, a solution to that, unfortunately, is not an aligning of purposes with the high school or the high stakes examination. Each university or each place of work is introducing their own filters. And that kind of makes me wonder whether, if I'm an 18-year-old just now, would an 18-year-old me or any one of us, whether it's in the panel or that's in the audience, appreciate going through 3 layers of filters to get to a university or get to a place of work? Why is there a need for that? And that kind of relates to what I was talking about earlier in terms of there is a general sense of mistrust between various stakeholders. And instead of addressing these mistrusts together, we are adding our own filters and saying, we don't trust yours, so we will do ours. And that I think is a very interesting paradox. Having spent some time in Finland, I call it the Finnish paradox because what Anchal was talking about in terms of the role of PISA. Interestingly, PISA gave Finland the tag of the world's best education system about 20, 22, 23 years ago, is now coming back to actually challenge the basic principles on which the Finnish education system is built, which is, the whole idea that each school has to be the best for that particular locality. And that meant that you would focus and invest a lot more on teacher training, and you would place a lot more trust. There is very less standardized testing. Because Finland has not been doing too well in the PISA for the last 10 years, their solution now is we will bring back standardized curriculum. We will bring back a lot more of standardized tests so that we ensure that there is some consistency and standardization across all the 15-year-olds so that our test results will go up and we would come back to be seen as one of the best education systems in the world. And I think that is a very dangerous paradox for any country to look at and for us to delve into. And that I think is something that kind of constantly intrigues me a lot.
Thank you. Thank you, Shring. And absolutely, the assessment should not feel like an assessment of the system and standardizing it because a number of children are not reaching that bar. Learning should be when I failed, learner stops asking, how many marks did I get? Or what score did I get? Or what grade did I get? Instead, it should be, what did I learn? What was the purpose of that particular lesson? And what did I learn out of it? I think that will be what we should be looking at, what the child learned, what the learner learned. So I think there is a very good question in the, what's the time like? We are almost at 6:46. We've got about 14 minutes left. So I think I will open the session for questions, and I'll take the first question, which is a very interesting one from the audience. How can we develop a school culture in which assessment supports the holistic development of the child, while also meeting the requirements of standardized testing, especially given that standardized test results remain important for college admissions after grade 12? So I'll take answers from all the panelists. We'll begin.
Can I go first?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, that's a very important question. And I think that is the kind of balance that we need to strike. Uh, my own view on this matter is that if you have done a good job of learning, if the school as an ecosystem understands why is it imparting education, whichever system, whether you are in the UK, whether you are in India, whether you are in Bhutan, what's important is to understand what does your curriculum really expect of students at the overall level, what kind of citizens are you trying to develop at the subject level, how are subjects enabling the development of those citizens? So, what are your learning standards? How are you looking at competencies or curricular goals or learning outcomes or any other phrase by which you denote the kind of specific things that students need to learn in each subject in each grade, along with all the values and dispositions which are critical for surviving in today's world. I think any school which invests in a systematic capacity building of its education staff, right from the principal, the head of the institution, down to every single teacher, whether she's a coordinator, whether she's the head teacher, whether she's an assistant teacher, substitute teacher, only and only when everybody has a sense of what to teach will they be able to understand how and why you have to teach those things, right? So, what to teach and why to teach, that there should be utmost clarity. The how to teach, and which is where the point of school culture becomes important, only and only stems from being empathetic and being understanding of the child. If you keep the child truly at the center of learning, you will have to figure out how children learn. The current generation will not and cannot learn the way we learned or our parents learned or our grandparents learned. It's a different generation. The kind of social pressures that they have are different. The kind of exposure children today have of media, of social, of all kinds of things are dramatically different. The examples that worked in 1960s, 1970s will not work. The experiments will not work. So we have to dramatically change the way we teach, and which is where the how of the teaching will only come if there is a steady investment in students' well-being, in student-centric pedagogy. If we are able to sort out the what, the why, and the how, the school culture is automatically going to move towards that of learning. Okay. And I truly believe that in a school culture where everybody is invested in this child's learning, such schools do well in these exams because uh, see, as a university, we have looked at several such examination papers, whether it's the IIT JEE paper, whether it is the PISA tests, CUET, all kinds of competitive exams. Okay, and at the heart of all these competitive exams, one thing that is assessed is your ability to go beyond content. It is your ability to think, to analyze. So, if within a school system, children are really inculcated with these abilities early on, they will ace these tests, right? So, this balance between doing well in school based assessments and doing well in all these other kind of assessments, I think it's a false kind of a dichotomy that we have created. If you know your subject well, you have studied it well, you are going to ace any assessments. At least you are going to get the qualifying mark, if not 100% on it.
Yeah.
Okay? So, my belief is that this dichotomy is absolutely false. And any school that is invested in the learning of its students by focusing on the what, the why, and the how is going to move towards a conducive school culture.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Shrin?
Yeah, no, I think what would be important, I think, and our experiences with various schools in Bhutan across the different districts in Bhutan has shown that when a school wants to bring in this culture of wanting to look at how do you help an individual child grow, there is a lot that can be done. Unfortunately, in many places, whatever comes from the center, whether it's a curriculum, whether it's a standardized exam, that gets taken as your the highest that we will do. And I think immediately when you are able to work with teachers and get them to think about, can we look at this as the bare minimum that needs to be done? And onto this, can we do many more? And I think when you're talking about a culture, if you are able to, at a school level, look at and bring into process by which every student and every teacher is helping each other look at what is it that I'm wanting to do and what is it that I'm good at and where do I want to go based on this particular area of strength that I'm building and the areas that I need to work on. Because more and more, I think at a systemic level, while as much as we say there's not much we can do to change, there are changes that are happening at the systemic level where many people are now questioning, why do we need to go to a university? Or can we develop the skills? And depending on what am I interested in, can I pursue something that I'm really interested in and that I'm capable of and go on to do it? And is there a need for me to go through a standardized test in that sense? So I think at a school level, there's much more that can be done, and I think the easiest thing that you could do as a school leader or as a school culture is to look at, can we enhance the trust that we build between ourselves? Can we trust the children to be able to say, hey, I want to do this over the next so and so months, and then come back and say, I have done this and this is how I think I have grown, and add a lot more layers of observations and inputs around what the child is saying. So, as far as I think coming from that assessment perspective, my way of looking at this constantly is, can we create many, many opportunities for the individuals to actually show to us what they are actually learning and demonstrate that I'm good at this? Not necessarily always creating opportunities for somebody from outside, whether it's technology or whether it is somebody else to come in and say, hey, you're not doing this. We think you are not doing this well. The child might have different perspectives on that. So, can we create as many spaces for them to actually show to us what they understand, what is going on in their mind, what is it that they are learning? As much opportunities of this would really, really be useful, because I think what Joella is also talking about in terms of AI and AI detectors and um, the area that I find quite interesting now is coming from this whole idea of you don't trust anybody, so we don't trust the kids to be able to put down something. We suspect that they are doing AI stuff, so we bring in as detectors. And just yesterday, I think I stumbled across something that I laughed at because somebody had put in a post about how somebody took out this whole first excerpt of the chapter 5 of Frankenstein book, which was written many, many years ago, and put it into an AI detector, and out comes a report saying the first three paragraphs of chapter 5 is 100% AI return. And those are the kind of things that I think we need to be really, really looking into and careful about, in terms of, it's very easy to bring in detectors and then say, you're not doing well, you're not doing well. Can we actually get them to show to us what they're doing? And that then creates this whole layer of trust. And out of this trust will emerge an understanding of, who am I as a child? What am I interested in? Can I pursue something that is doing? And I think the systems are moving more and more towards those becoming much more possible than what we had thought about 5 years ago.
Thank you. Thank you, Shring. I think I take back a big chunk of the word trust. I think that is what we need to build around. That is most important. Look at the processes, look at the purpose of assessment. And as we close the discussion, we are going to close with something concrete. I want everyone to name one thing. It could be a practice, a shift, maybe one conversation that you believe that any educator could act on this week to make assessment more human, more personalized, more contextualized. And please put it in the chat. And there are some students also in the audience. I want you to tell us, what would you ask the educator in this room to do differently for learners like you?